polymerase chain reaction, or PCR, is an invention I had in about 82, 83. It's a way that you can produce a little teeny piece of DNA, a specific one, out of the whole genome and make as many copies of it as you wanted to, and there's no limit. Now, what I invented was a way that you could use molecules to do the looking for you, and they could start some little process that would find the thing you wanted and copy it, and keep copying it, and copy the copies, and then copy the copies. So you'd go from having one copy of it to 2 to 4 to 8 to 16 to 32 to 64 to 128, on up to 1 million if you've done it 20 times, and 1 billion if you've done it 30 times. When you get 1 billion of them, you've got as many copies of the thing you want as there are little nucleotides or letters in the whole thing. Right? It's got 3 billion. So you've got just about as many. You can pick up any one you want to at that point, and it's the one you want. You take a haystack, basically, with a needle lost in it, and you turn the whole haystack into needles, and then you just take a handful. That's what it does. It's almost like magic.
So what they use is the so-called polymerase chain reaction. Have you heard about that? Mm-hmm. Kary Mullis is the inventor of it. Lives down here, not far from here. He also questions HIV/AIDS. Nobelist.
He also does acid.
Yeah. Just a little bit. Yes, yes. Kary Mullis is not your mainstream average scientist.
PCR. The former graduate student from Berkeley achieved international fame for inventing the polymerase chain reaction, PCR, a few years ago. This, ironically, is the sensitive detection technique used by AIDS officials to claim they can find HIV in almost every antibody-positive AIDS patient. Mullis refuses to buy this argument. I can't find a single virologist who will give me references which show that HIV is the probable cause of AIDS. If you ask a virologist for that information, you don't get an answer. You get fury. Ask Mullis, how could a dormant virus cause fatal AIDS? Biochemistry demands that every biochemical reaction is a consequence of an equivalent biochemical action. How could a virus that can be seen only after a billion-fold amplification be responsible for the fatal biochemical reactions that kill AIDS patients? But even Mullis's logic cannot penetrate orthodox AIDS think. For example, take the response of a prominent AIDS researcher to Mullis's case against HIV. The incident was a television debate in New York on May 23, 1994, in which Duisberg used Mullis's arguments against HIV. The AIDS researcher's response was a rather unprofessional question. Isn't he, Mullis, the surfer? Obviously, in the mind of this mainstream scientist, surfing is not compatible with serious science. Indeed, Mullis is a Trojan horse to the AIDS establishment, adored for his invention of the only technique to detect at least a gene of the elusive AIDS virus, but feared for his outspoken criticism of the virus-AIDS hypothesis. For his PCR invention, Mullis has won the 1993 Nobel Prize for Chemistry, making him the third Nobel laureate to question the AIDS virus and the first to belong to the Group for the Scientific Reappraisal of the HIV/AIDS hypothesis.
At least 400 scientists, journalists, and other interested people in that group for the rethinking the AIDS hypothesis. But that's 400 people now. They do include amongst those a couple of Nobel laureates. One who's most recent in chemistry, Dr. Kary Mullis, who is the inventor of the PCR test, and he is with us. He does not support the HIV hypothesis.
The first time I really questioned it, I was working on a project where we were measuring HIV in people's blood at this place called Specialty Laboratories in Santa Monica. I was just a consultant there. I came in about 3 days a month. And we were working on that, and at some point we needed to re-up our grant from the NIH to work on that, and I had to write it. And so the first line of that was, HIV is the probable cause of AIDS. And I wrote that, and then I said, well, I need a paper, some kind of scientific paper, to reference that statement, because when you make a statement like that, that's like a fact. So you need to say, here's how come I know that, right? You put a little 1. If it's the first statement you've made, and then you put down at the bottom of the paper, you have a 1, and you say, here's a paper by somebody that describes why that statement is true, right? And so I said, well, what's that? I don't know. Let me think about, what is that paper? Who do I go to for that? And I looked around. I asked a couple of virologists at that company, and they said, no, you don't have to reference. I said, I have to reference that because I don't know where that came from. How do I know that? And it turned out that nobody knew it. There wasn't a scientific reference, like a paper that somebody had submitted with like experimental data in it and like logical discussion and said, here's how come we know that HIV is the probable cause of AIDS. There was nothing out there like that. Nothing.
Why would the finest virologist in the world, the most noted virologist, member of our National Academy of Sciences, Peter Duesberg, why would he put his entire career on the line? What did he have to gain? He's already lost his laboratory and his funding. They can't take away his professorship because he's tenured. Why would a Charles A. Thomas, professor emeritus of Harvard, say the same thing? Why would Kary Mullis, who won the Nobel Prize in virology last year, why would he stick his neck out? What did he have to gain? These are the questions reporters should be asking.
Guys like Fauci get up there and start talking, he doesn't know anything really about anything, and I'd say that to his face. Nothing. The man thinks you can take a blood sample and stick it in an electron microscope, and if it's got a virus in there, you'll know it. He doesn't understand electron microscopy, and he doesn't understand medicine, and he should not be in a position like he's in. Most of those guys up there on the top are just total administrative people, and they don't know anything about what's going on the bottom. Those guys have got an agenda, which is not what we would like them to have, being that we pay for them to take care of our health in some way. They've got a personal kind of agenda. They make up their own rules as they go. They change them when they want to, and they smugly, like Tony Fauci, does not mind going on television in front of the people that pay his salary and lie directly into the camera.
The reason that only one drug has been made available, AZT, because it's the only drug that thus far has been shown in scientifically controlled trials to be safe and effective.
From Spin Magazine, July 1994, Volume 10, Issue 4. With Beck on the front cover. When ABC's Nightline approached Mullis about participating in a documentary on himself, he instead urged them to focus their attention on the HIV debate. Quote, "That's a much more important story," he told producers, who up to that point had never acknowledged the controversy. In the end, Nightline ran a two-part series, the first on Kary Mullis, the second on the HIV debate. Mullis was hired by ABC for a 2-week period to act as their scientific consultant and direct them to sources. Quote, "What ABC needs to do," says Mullis, "is talk to Chairman of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, NIAID, Dr. Anthony Fauci, and Dr. Robert Gallo, one of the discoverers of HIV, and show that they're assholes, which I could do in 10 minutes. But I point out Gallo would just refuse to discuss the HIV debate, just as he's always done. Quote, "I know he will," Mullis shoots back, anger rising in his voice. "But you know what? I would be willing to chase the little bastard from his car to his office and say, 'This is Kary Mullis trying to ask you a goddamn simple question,' and let the cameras follow. If people think I'm a crazy person, that's okay. But here's a Nobel Prize winner trying to ask a simple question from those who spent $22 billion and killed 100,000 people. It has to be on TV. It's a visual thing. I'm not unwilling to do something like that." He pauses, then continues, quote, "And I don't care about making an ass of myself because most people realize I am one." Referring to the guardians of the HIV establishment, such as Gallo and Fauci, Mullis suddenly turns from rage to pity. Quote, "I feel sorry for him," he admits. Quote, "I want to have the story unveiled, but you know what? I'm just not the kick him in the balls kind of guy. I'm a moral person, but I'm not a crusader. I think it's a terrible tragedy that it's happened. There are some terrible motivations of humans involved in this, and Gallo and Fauci have got to be some of the worst." Then anger strikes in again. Quote, "Personally, I want to see those fuckers pay for a little bit. I want to see them lose their position. I want to see their goddamn children have to go to junior college. I mean, who do we care about? Do we care about these people that are HIV positive, whose lives have been ruined? Those are the people I'm most concerned about. Every night I think about this. I think, what is my interest in this? Why do I care? I don't know anybody dying of it. They're right about that. Well, except one of my girlfriend's brothers died of it, and I think he died of AZT.
Okay, who do we trust? Fauci? Fauci doesn't know enough to, if Fauci wants to get on television with somebody who knows a little bit about this stuff and debate him, he could easily do it because he's been asked. I mean, I've had a lot of people, president of the University of South Carolina asked Fauci if he'd come down there and debate me on the stage in front of the student body because I wanted somebody who was from the other side to come down there and balance because I felt like, well, these guys can listen to me, but I need to have somebody else down here that's going to tell me the other side. But Fauci didn't want to do it.
Many scientific colleagues had not previously realized that Mullis questioned HIV's significance, and they now are becoming seriously unnerved by his comments. Although many journalists refuse even to mention his dissenting view, Mullis continues to hammer the AIDS establishment with his outspoken criticisms. Where is the research that says HIV is the cause of AIDS? We know everything in the world about HIV now. There are 20,000 people in the world who now specialize in HIV. None have any interest in the possibility HIV doesn't cause AIDS, because if it doesn't, their expertise is useless.
Gallo lost the rights to the test. This was published in Newsweek in '94, and the American government let him fall like a hot potato, and already the industry built up a new man. This was David Ho here from New York, and he came up with a completely new model of the virus, saying now we have not a slow virus, but we have a virus à grande vitesse, at high speed. And he was using Kary Mullis' PCR technique, which is a multiplication technique, not a quantification technique, by the way, and multiplying molecules into its millions and equal those molecules with the virus, right? Absolutely ridiculous. Even more, as those sequences he's going to multiply and equal them with the virus, that's the viral load, are present in everybody. It's just a way to save face for the whole AIDS industry, because more and more people are aware that this could not be, because inside the AIDS scene there are a lot of critical medical doctors, but they saw such a lot of contradiction, and it was discussed on conferences. So there was high noon for a new medal and a new test where the pharmaceutical companies could make a great business out of it.
Invented by the AIDS dissident, Dr. Kary Mullis, PCR, the polymerase chain reaction, is a technique that enables a scientist to take a sample containing a minute amount of DNA and replicate that DNA sequence until there are 1 million copies. One of PCR's first applications was to try to detect HIV. According to Dr. Mullis, PCR amplifies whatever DNA is in a sample, regardless of whether that DNA belongs to HIV or a contaminant, and that there is no sure way to determine which part of the amplified material could be HIV and which part could be a contaminant.
There are no really good experiments that would lead anybody who was at least maintaining a healthy skepticism to believe that HIV was responsible for this series of, not series, but kind of a loose confederation of diseases that people are now willing to call AIDS, right? It's a confederation of maybe 30 different diseases, all of which have existed in one form or other prior to the condition that we call AIDS ever being pointed out, and all of which have had some other explanation at one time or other. To say that all 30 of those are somehow caused, in at least some cases, called AIDS cases, by a virus called HIV, I think I haven't seen any evidence for that. I haven't even seen anybody trying to bring evidence forth for that.
And he said he's been looking for that since, I guess, the late 80s, and he hasn't ever been able to find anyone that can give him a paper that showed, number one, isolation of HIV, rigorous formal isolation of HIV, and secondly, using Koch's postulates, demonstrating that HIV is a causal microorganism. Where is the original paper that isolated HIV so that nothing else was present, and they actually could go and find what the proteins were and the nucleic acids were? I think you won't find that paper because it hasn't been published yet.
How do they misuse PCR to estimate all these supposed free viral RNAs that may or may not be there?
I think misuse PCR is not quite. I don't think you can misuse PCR. Actually, no, the results, the interpretation of it. See, if you can say, if they could find this virus in you at all, and with PCR, if you do it well, you can find almost anything in anybody. It starts making you believe in the sort of Buddhist notion that everything is contained in everything else, right? I mean, because if you can amplify one single molecule up to something that you can really measure, which PCR can do, then there's just very few molecules that you don't have at least one single one of them in your body, okay? So that could be thought of as a misuse of it, just to claim that it's meaningful. To test for that one and say that has any special meaning is what I think is the problem. Not that PCR has been misused. It's like, it's not an estimation. No, it's a really quantitative thing. It tells you something about nature and about what's there, but it allows you to take a very minuscule amount of anything and make it measurable, and then talk about it in meetings and stuff like it is important. See, that's not a misuse. That's just sort of a misinterpretation.
That if you have any proof that HIV does cause AIDS, please show it to me as soon as possible, or anyone else here. But other than that, this is a safety net. This is something I'm putting out because I believe that if you tell enough people will care.
Did you see who that was? That was Bob from La Bamba, Richie Valens' brother. He always made me cry at the end. Richie! Not my Richie.
To be honest with you, I'm disappointed that not more of my own colleagues, actor friends that I had invited that said I'll be there, are not here. But one is actually David Gray, thank you very much, and Krista Rowe. I mean, there's a bunch of you people, Apollonia, but there should be more. There should be a lot more. We should care about this because we dish this out unthinkingly to the world, and I think it is our responsibility first and foremost to finally go through this educational process, as uncomfortable as it is, because it's worth it. Because if what we are saying or suggesting is true, the implications are humongous. They're terrible.
The liars and killers like Fauci and Gallo and Hazeltine and Essex and Flossie von Stahl and the Margaret Fischels, these people are getting by with the lie and getting paid immense sums of money for it and praise from the rest of the world while they murder. It is a scandal and a scam beyond belief. The virologists who are responsible for this, what do they have to gain? Now, I don't know what Duesberg had to gain, or Charles A. Thomas, or Kary Mullis. He already got his Nobel Prize. Why does he come out and say it? And he's the one that found the test, the PCR reaction. And he said that there is no body of evidence that supports that the virus causes any disease whatsoever. But what about the individuals who have perpetrated this lie? They are all multi-millionaires. Fucking stoned.
Why? You're not a climate scientist.
That doesn't mean anything.
It means what?
A scientist doesn't have to be a specialist.
Really? Are you not qualified to talk about climate?
Quiet.
Respectfully, you are.
I'm qualified to talk about climatology.
Have you published it?
What? You don't have to publish. I don't want to get in a fight with you, sir, but I will.
You're telling my